Continue the commentary as normal, but this time without the distractions. Oh, what if we cut to what somebody else is doing before the next interjection? Because this is actually where the chapter is supposed to end and the next chapter is supposed to begin. And we can make it flow a little better if we do it like that. Would that be okay? Would that be an acceptable thing to do?
Okay, I went through your videos on all three of those people, and you did not do that to Sladester.
I mean, I did though. And I'm gonna point out how you missed these things. And the real difference between the three is that one of them, I did it in an actual commentary rather than in a separate video. Or outside of the video in general. This is, of course, discounting the fact that I simply said I was going to do all of these things, and by the logic you've been using with me, that doesn't mean that all of these things mean the same thing. I mean, in reality it does when we actually go back into reality instead of FROM world, but that's not necessarily the case since you've been arguing semantics that are so pedantic, you may as well call me out for my avatar being off-center by a single fucking pixel.
Your first video on Desiccator Magic...
Oh, and by the way, I called him by his actual username. So I already insulted him less than what you just did by default.
Not only included this bit, which makes it very clear your misunderstanding of the word subjective is a recurring problem.
Granted, him saying such and such card is broken because of this combo is subjective and something that can either be proven or disproven with use and time. So, fun fact, that's also a subjective idea that can be proven or disproven, although you'd actually have more of a leg to stand on with this than with anything else that you said. Desolator Magic famously thinks that most decks should be powered down. A clip of him saying this coming from the very video that you're talking about that you claim to have watched.
I think you all know by now my opinion on making all decks more powerful. I think all decks need to be, like, de-leveled and powered down in Modern, at least.
Alright, I guess I need another one.
Shut the fuck up!
So this indicates that a card that happens to be powerful but doesn't break the game would be broken to him, even if it's not a broken card in the wider scale of Magic. But when I say it can be proven and disproven with use and time, I'm saying that the proof or disproof of his point about cards being broken can be shown with data that requires both use of the cards and time to make. He can still subjectively think the cards are broken, but if it isn't frequently being used in decks that perform well, then the power level of the card has data showing that it's actually lower than other cards, meaning we have data that other things are far more powerful than it, thus making it not broken. That doesn't change what his opinion is, though. It just means that his metric for where the line of a card or combo being broken just sits lower than the majority's, which really just means he prefers low power kitchen table Magic to the current state of tournament play, which isn't actually wrong, just an opinion that I don't agree with. Importantly, different play groups can also have different expectations for the power level of their cards, meaning it can be both proven too powerful to Desolator Magic and proven to not be powerful enough by a competitive player, while also being just right for someone playing like a power level 7 or 8 commander deck. It's almost like there's a lot of nuance to this that you have no idea what you're talking about, and you don't even need to know card games to get this amount of nuance, by the way. You just need to understand the basic concept of humans interacting and having different opinions.
But outside of that, it's incredibly calm and civil, not really encouraging him to do anything else but be more open-minded.
You see, Magic on YouTube should be a discussion. You present your argument in the video, the commenters present arguments in their comments and discuss your ideas and thoughts, and you can even join in on that discussion. There'll certainly be straight up haters, but I honestly don't see that on your channel. So, I'm gonna give you some advice that a professional Magic player would be giving you as well. You cannot reach success in this game, either Magic or YouTube, by doing nothing but talking. You have to listen and admit when someone has a better argument than you. I knew a guy who dismissed what I had to say and only listened to the pros. It was a complete and utter idiot. So I totally feel where you're coming from with that sentiment. If I'd have just listened to the pros, I never would have done some of the awesome things that I've done in Magic, and I probably wouldn't have gotten into Commander either. But I did listen to what they have to say take their points into consideration, and come up with my own solution. Which is the point of both what you're supposed to be doing and what they actually do.
Your second video on him is also perfectly calm, and you even say in your final thoughts that he is perfectly capable of making good videos and has done so before, but just didn't put enough research into the one you're covering.
This is in no way a personal attack on you. This is me laying out actual facts and providing a dissenting opinion. So, I'm going to end this video with some advice. Before you make a video, actually know what you're talking about. You tend to make pretty good videos when you do. Wait, is that all you're going to talk about? What about the third and fourth videos? Yeah, I've made 2 other videos in relation to him, notably a video where I talk about a hater rant he made and highlight his harassment towards me in relation to the aftermath of that video. Funny thing, it's actually structured very similarly to a commentary I made where I do not play any clips of the original video, which I refer to as a zero-shot commentary. So if we use rules established on my channel for what counts as a commentary, then guess what? It's a fucking commentary. It's the third Desolator Magic commentary, and if you search for Desolator Magic on my channel, or even both my name and Desolator Magic's name in the general YouTube search bar, it's the first thing to show up. Now, calling out someone for harassment will be relevant later, trust me, and so is a short on my channel that documents the harassment that predates this. Like, motherfucker, I have all of this in a playlist on my channel. But I can play how that particular video, the Desolator Magic Saga, ends for you. Since you're so shit at using a basic fucking search engine. If you want to play the controversy game with me, I can play the controversy game with you. And I have news for you. You think you're good at drumming up haters and growing your profile from it? Well, I know how to end motherfuckers that cross me. I would tell you to ask Corey Margera, but I think I've made my case. Is it some of my harshest work? No, not only have I elevated my game since then, but it's really nowhere close to the Alexander Kayford com in terms of just how harsh it actually sounds. And that's why what I said to Slater sounds so much more brutal than this. And even what I said in the Kayford com, which we'll get to later. It's not because I didn't do it with Desolator. It's because I've kind of gotten more consistent in doing it better. And Corey was actually before Desolator, so that should tell you something. In fact, you know what? You want me to be harsh in an actual commentary on Desolator Magic? Well, I mean, we're in a commentary right now, and there's no rule in this saying that I have to talk about your dumbass the entire time, and there's a video by him talking about the ways that MTG Arena cheats people, and while there are some valid points in that video, there's a lot of shit I have a problem with, especially since he's titled it as a documentary. And you know what? I've got the length for it. I may as well go full H-Bomber guy, right? Ladies and or gentlemen, allow me to reintroduce Desolator Magic, because sure, why not? Let's talk about the overarching issue we're going to see throughout this video. You're calling this a documentary, and yet at no point is there an actual source cited in regards to anything you actually say, only alluding to sources of your information, especially when you're still using your more typical format, which makes it super easy to, at the very least, put screenshots on screen that confirm the things that you claim are verified. Now, I'm aware that it's not really a set-in-stone rule for documentaries to do that, but the fact remains that this goes back to, well, our first interaction, really. You claimed that proof existed of something, pointed me to where the proof was when I asked for it. I didn't find it, so I asked you to show me your proof specifically, and you got mad about that. Sure, you could totally make a documentary that doesn't provide proof in the ways that I'm describing. Feels a little weird to shove a sponsor in the middle of it too, though. And it definitely feels weird to pretend you're a video essayist for clicks when you put a sponsor in the middle of your video, but I digress. Let's talk about what you actually say in this thing. And actually, let's start with that sponsor real quick.
But before we jump into it, oh, you know what day it is. Black Friday here in America, so you can get some crazy deals at the #1 greatest sponsor of the channel, Into the AM. You can upgrade your own wardrobe this season. Let's be honest, it probably needs it. You ever see those people walking around on the street and they're like in high fashion, but it's super high maintenance. It's like hard to wear, and that costs them like $300. Well, 80% off sale right now, and you can get an extra 10% off with code DESTHREADS. And yes, the math works out exactly the way you're thinking.
Okay, the whole thing about high maintenance fashion, completely unrelated. You're sponsoring a graphic tee company guy. It was Black Friday, everything was on sale, and funny how you don't comment on the actual price that you're getting that total of 90% off on. I looked it up, it's still a very good deal, but you'd honestly be way better off in an ad spot focusing on that. But that's all the more reason that comparing it to high fashion is really stupid, because you're not really in an audience that would care about high fashion.
They got some new styles, but we'll break into that later in the video. Let's jump into the thing I'm most excited about, telling you how MTG Arena is cheating you. For legal reasons, I have to say that not 100% of this video is certified true, for sure. I kind of already said that, but I have to spell it out. So, first, the Shuffler. Let's talk about the Shuffler. Let's talk about the research done by Douglas when third-party assistance programs and trackers and that kind of stuff was still allowed in MTG Arena. Somebody named Douglas did a little research on, just 1 million games of Magic. So, tiny sample size, and found, I'm not going to dive way into it, I made a whole video on this, it's 40 minutes long, but the Shuffler was off by like 3 to 6%. Clumping was the problem. How do you get clumping in a random number generator? You gotta wonder.
That's simple. Because randomness generated by a computer isn't truly random. It's actually impossible to generate even one truly random number with a computer. And in reality, RNG in a digital program is created by an algorithm that generates pseudo-random numbers. And while it's possible for the difference to be imperceptible, it's also possible for the difference to be incredibly fucking obvious. Now, that being said, MTGO's Shuffler does not have this problem. We'll get into this later in why that is, but it actually has more to do with what the Shuffler does in order to help the player, especially in regards to queues with best of one games. Oh, and also, the Reddit thread calls out Douglas for improper hypothesis testing that skews the results towards the one that they want to be true, although that doesn't necessarily make his data lack in value.
Eventually, the theory came out that cards that have already been drawn were accidentally being included as a potential to be drawn from. So if you had 4 in your deck and you drew 1, you still had 4 in your deck. That exactly precisely explained the mathematical difference.
This, by the way, is Douglas hypothesizing that the root of the problem comes from a known implementation error in the Fisher-Yates Shuffler, but Douglas doesn't even say it exactly precisely explained the difference, though. Only that it was a plausible solution, and one that wouldn't really have come to mind if not for that known error in the Fisher-Yates Shuffler. So, Desolator Magic being hyperbolic while pretending to present factual information. What else is new?
Here's the thing, though. It would appear that they did this on purpose, because once you mulliganed one time, the entire shuffling problem went away. Oh, they must have rewritten the randomization and deck drawing code and then called the function a different way. Like, no, they did it on purpose. Come on.
So you're going to rely on Douglas for what the problem actually is, but the exact thing that he cites as the probable reason that mulliganing fixes the problem? That's when you dismiss what he has to say about it. This is a perfect example of you finding an excuse to call wizards evil, which is even worse when you really don't need to make up shit to do that. Oh, wait. I'm sorry. You do if your entire business model is built on hating wizards. Then you need to make up shit in order to have enough content to farm to people and rage bait everybody.
Shortly after this was announced, they didn't put anything in changelog. They didn't admit it, but it went away. He tracked another 150,000 games and the entire shuffling error went away.
Yet more made-up numbers that you're pulling out of your ass. He didn't say how much data he collected in the update, just that the updated data showed that the distributions were normal, and that at some point he'd have an aggregated version of that data. Even if we were to assume it's the same sample size as his original data set, that answer would still be 1 million, not the 150,000 that you said. I don't know where you got that number from.
So whether it was on purpose or a coding problem, I don't know.
You just said that it had to be on purpose, you dickhead. You're clearly implying it was on purpose just because of the fact that it was fixed quickly, even though the solution that Douglas provided, run the shuffler multiple times, was in his post and is probably a single line of code that could probably be added to an update that was already going to happen, since Douglas even said the change coincided with the War of the Spark update. I will agree with you that it should have been in the patch notes, but that's less relevant than the fact that the issue was corrected almost immediately after it was pointed out.
Now, the other noteworthy thing with this whole experiment was the fact that it was overrepresented in lands. If you started with not enough lands, you were extremely likely to continue to draw not enough lands, and if you had too many in your opening hand, you would get flooded.
Well, for one, Douglas's entire study was centered around how frequently people were drawing lands more so than drawing non-land card, especially since that's a lot easier to test for. But in fact, there was a section on duplicates that showed, but even then he noted that it wasn't the point and was only looking for those things in the first few cards of the deck anyway. Mana Screw and Mana Flood happening on a regular basis is much more noticeable in the dataset than individual copies of 4-ofs, thus why it makes more sense to test for that. And by the way, noticeable but not immense, which is a quote from his post by the way, is not the same thing as high likelihood.
Anybody who played Magic back in those days, you know that this was true. You don't need a million games worth of numbers to tell you that after a couple hundred games, you could tell the land draws were not the same as paper.
But having a couple of hundred games isn't the same thing as having, a million in terms of a data set. That's why Douglas's data was needed. And here's a fun fact. I didn't experience this problem either. Now, my decks tended to run a number of lands that was actually in what Douglas referred to as the sweet spot, where your land draws had a tendency to be normal. So that could be a reason that it didn't feel different to me. But that's why the work of someone like Douglas is necessary, and why it bothers me so much that you want to butcher it.
And we had idiots calling us shuffle deniers and paranoid delusional whatever, named Jeff Hooglin mostly, but other people too, saying, oh, you're all paranoid, you want an excuse for losing, I'm so much better than you guys. And then multiple people come out and say, no, it's all true, here's the proof. And then he got real quiet all of a sudden.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to yet another Bitchware segment. Because, I scoured Hooglin's social media and can't find anything from that time period in regards to MTG Arena or Shuffler, other than one comment about initially not wanting to play MTG Arena because of not having the formats he wants to play, which, fair. Now, these comments may have been deleted, and the reason why it's going to be relevant is, right about now.
Which is normally good, but we want to hear your opinion on how wrong you were, Jeff. So waiting.
Yeah, so, your petty ass is going to be waiting. Let me just, check my watch here. A long-ass time. He quit MTG Arena, primarily covers Marvel Snap, and although the Timeless format is bringing him back into the fold of MTG Arena, that happened after your video came out. So you've got basically no excuse for this one. Then again, it's probably not a good idea to respond to everyone who wants to dredge up 4-year-old bullshit that isn't even visible anymore. Ephraim, that's part of the reason I didn't want to do all this shit. But, I mean, here we fucking are.
So the dude who did this actually posted what the code should look like instead of what he thinks they did wrong. Wow, how embarrassing for them.
He didn't post any fucking code. He just said shuffle it a couple more times and it'll fix it. You inflamed jackass.
So if you want to look into that whole catastrophe, it's a whole Reddit thread, one of the most famous ones of all time, posted 5 years ago.
Not even in the top 50 most upvoted threads in r/Magic Arena. You dusty shovel.
So next up, we got a real short one. The stated rare wildcard opening odds are just wrong. They're just simply wrong. They finally admitted that as you fail to open a rare wildcard, the odds get up and up and up, which means that it starts at a lower amount. So if they said 1 in 15 packs have a rare wild card in it, it actually starts at like 20 or 25, and then it increases, and then stays at like 1 in 10 until you hit it.
That doesn't mean the odds aren't what they stated to be. It means that the odds aren't uniform across all packs that you open. It's called a pity system, and the simple number they give you is essentially the average across the entirety of the pity, and it's actually more fair than what paper packs are able to do. And by the way, the numbers you're giving are wrong. Rare wildcards hit hard pity or guaranteed pull at 15 packs, so the total probability is actually greater than 1 in 15 or 1 in 30 depending on what you look at. Hey, more importantly,
remember, this is the proven section of the video. One of the devs came out and said, this is how it works. There was a whole diagram, breakdown, the exact numbers, all that used to be posted online. So once again, not a conspiracy theory. The devs came out and said it works this way.
then how is it cheating? If the devs are telling you the odds, then it's cheating because it's not strictly per pack odds? No, cheating requires something to work differently than what is advertised, and it's advertised as working this way, so it's not cheating. Unlike you going into another ad read, which I'm going to skip over.
So moving back into the way Arena's cheating you out of your money, very, very early on, I want to say 1 to 2 years after the launch of Arena, they just started threatening third-party trackers. They said, you're not going to do this. We're not going to allow it. We'll find some reason to make you go away. Now, how many of those emails were real? What rumors are the truth? But basically everybody stopped. So WotC sent out something.
Hey, you know what else I'm skipping over? All of this. You want to know why? Because it's a lie. Big shock. Not only can I find nothing about these allegations anywhere, but log trackers, the main thing he tries to talk about, are all over the place, still used, and in fact, most of the time are how people who draft on Arena have their deck list on the overlay. Fuck you. This is just entirely incorrect.
I think, and I couldn't find a reference to this, but it's just in my head that I remember this happening, so, not the most reliable source. They were tracking the win-loss ratios of decks, and then they real quick when people found out removed it from the log. Rumor is to this day they're still doing it. Why were they even doing it in the first place? Why is it in their business? Who cares how much a deck wins? Everything's supposed to be just random, and Magic, standard constructed, will just police itself, right?
I know where you're going with this, but, really? Asking why a statistic is being tracked, that is one of the reasons people are using third-party trackers to view. Also, they actually posted deck lists that win 6 or more matches in a row at Platinum on their own website, thus providing transparency for what the metagame looks like earlier in 2023. Gee, I wonder why they would track a stat when they're publishing high-performing lists. It's a mystery to me! Piss off.
You don't need to take somebody who's not winning enough and artificially boost it so they feel better, and you don't need to take somebody who's winning too much and artificially cripple their ability to win, right? Isn't that correct, WotC, or are you doing something in the background? I'm very curious.
Yes, because any form of matchmaking that pits players against other players of similar skill based on having similar win-loss ratios is totally manipulation. Do you just not know how online games work at all?
But hilariously enough, the actual reason that people theorize that they took down all the trackers is because they were losing active players left and right, and people were doing active player graphs. They're like, look at this thing going down. A couple bad articles came out trashing them, and they just said, okay, no more trackers.
That also hasn't stopped. They put the game on Steam, which has more tracking for active player counts. I thought you had just glided off this subject too. You tricked me into covering this lie. I can pull up how many players are on Arena right fucking now if I wanted to.
Let's talk about hand smoothing. So that specifically refers to the number of lands in your opening hand in best of 1. In best of 3, things tend to kind of even out. In best of 1, one bad game ruins you the match. There goes your ranking. So what did they do? What was their solution? Without telling anyone, because they know better than you, until people posted, this has to be how it's working. I am way too consistently drawing this. What is going on? And they finally came out and admitted it. The whole time, people, probably including Jeff Hoogland, but also like him, were like, no, you're paranoid. That's not how it works. You just don't know how randomization works. And then once again, the devs came out and said, no, this is how it works. Yeah, we did this.
I would like to be able to just jump in time at this point, because this right here is the one thing that's actually cheating that you brought up that isn't wild speculation in the confirmed part of this documentary. Although it's intended for the benefit of the player, you absolutely are allowed to have a problem with it. Although I would like to note that, again, they were transparent about this existing, at the very least when asked about it, and the reasons why they did it. But, like I said, hopefully you're just gonna see a timestamp in the corner instead of me covering this entire diatribe. Spoiler warning, you're not.
In fact, let me read a statement by Chris Clay. So, the goal of the system is to reduce the number of mulligans and, quote, non-games in best of 1 matches without significantly altering optimal deck construction, which they failed to do, by the way, such that there is no need to maintain a best of 1 and best of 3 version of the same deck. Well, you're already not going to sideboard, so he's already way off. Clearly does not know how Magic works, but
yeah, that's spot on, actually. You're right. There would still be a difference between running a deck for a best of 1 and running a deck for best of 3, because you don't have to include as many fringe answers in your best of 3 main board as you do in your best of 1 main board. In theory, you could just run the same deck in both formats and have a sideboard that doesn't get used in best of 1 format, but that won't be as good as retooling the deck for the 2 different styles of play. Wow, that's very good. Why am I not skipping this?
in particular, we want to reduce the number of new-to-Magic players that bounce off the game due to frustrating mulligans and mana issues early in their experience, especially those coming in from other games where there's no variance in the mana system.
Wait, so in that case, the players this feature targets would run the same deck in both Best of 3 and Best of 1, especially since Best of 1 is more geared towards newer players coming from other digital card games, where Best of 1 or sideboarding involving switching to a different deck is entirely more common. It absolutely makes sense that he would say that with the additional context. Oh, wait, that's right. This is Desolator Magic we're talking about. Of course, context and reading comprehension are going to be on the back burner.
You're worried about new people rage quitting the game, and you extended standard to 3 years and let people still play abusive control and attrition decks at tier 1.
The 3-year standard decision was made way after this was introduced. Like, we are talking years. We're talking a decision that was made in 2023 versus something decided on in 2018, if not earlier. And yeah, dude, no other card game has oppressive control strategies. After all, Hearthstone doesn't have Reno decks, Flesh and Blood doesn't have Azalea, and have you seen what Yu-Gi-Oh cards do? And if you want control to not exist, go play Pokemon. Except don't, because Garbodor. Always Garbodor. Every format, it's a fucking Garbodor.
In unrelated news, people are quitting Arena in huge numbers. WotC is still in the dark as to why.
Because despite their efforts to make being free to play in the game viable, it's not working? Because people can leave their houses and go out and play paper Magic now, thus making the need for Arena far lesser than it was? Because trying to compete with digital games using a primarily physical game and not integrating the two together properly means that people will just steer towards the more fleshed out digital products? There's a lot of reasons why people are quitting Arena, dude, and you have managed to say absolutely zero of them.
But let's read exactly how this system works by paranoid delusional conspiracy theorist Ryan Spain, Arena's former senior designer, the guy who designed and implemented this system. The system draws an opening hand from each of 2 separately randomized copies of the decks, and leaning towards giving the player the hand with the mix of spells and lands, without regard for color, closest to the average for that deck. It draws 2, then it eliminates the least realistic. Here is the exact table in case you're wondering. I believe that applies to a 21 land deck, or 24, one of the two. It's like a standard deck, so I mean, just look at those numbers. So here's the thing, helping out everybody equally, making sure you don't get a quote non-game, is the one in the background babysitting algorithm that I actually don't disagree with. It actually makes sense. I want to lose because my deck lost and my decisions lost, not because I got 1 land and then drew nothing.
All right, cool. So that means you're not being cheated because everyone is on the same playing field and it's giving you what you want. Right. So why is this on a video about how Arena cheats you then?
So why am I mentioning this in a video about how Arena cheats you? Well, because it's doing a thing in the background that's making it not random, so it is kind of cheating you. I mean, it's at least lying to you. But, unsurprisingly, pro players with absolutely no morals who only care about winning and money and their own status, so in other words, all of them, use something called the 13 Mountain exploit. It's exactly what it sounds like. Run 13 mountains in your deck because you're running a blitz deck that only needs to get to 2, and you will draw 1 land way more often than you'll draw 0. Like, immensely more often. It's virtually guaranteed.
Okay, right. So, for one, the person who's the problem in this situation is the person making the exploitative deck. The issue here, though, comes from how to fix this exploit. You agree that helping everyone not have mana screw is a good system, yeah? But you don't like when someone exploits that. The irony of this course being that this is the exact kind of thing you were saying would be good kitchen table experimental magic, and when I told you that it didn't work on a fundamental level, You got mad at me for it, and yet here you are now bitching about the same thing I was telling you would happen. But that bit of irony aside, I'd say that the problem is that the best of one algorithm does too good of a job, thus making it so that bad deck building decisions are being rewarded. I am very curious, though, what you're going to say here, because this isn't just an easy fix given the goals of the best of one format, and I'm curious if you have any solutions other than bitching about net deckers.
So it was a win on turn 4/5 deck, which back in the day was way too fast and competitive. Now, if you don't win on turn 3, why are you even playing Arena? And yeah, ruined an entire tournament, people threw a fit, and they did precisely nothing to fix it. It's actually still a problem to this day. I think they just politely asked pros to stop doing it, or pros got so much backlash for effectively cheating. I don't know, maybe they silently put a floor on it, where this effect stops at like 17 land density or something, I don't know.
Well, it could be the issue that the deck tends to get stuck on only 3 lands, and any opponent that has more than one thing to interact with, it just kind of beats it, since you're often limited to 1 or 2 plays per turn. You talked about the current standard being much faster, thus indicating why a mono red deck that hits a wall on turn 3 would have problems against decks that are expected to be setting up kills on turn 4, which isn't true at all if you actually look at what the metagame is and play it, but I'll probably just address that later. Oh, and then there's the way that you were lying in the first place about this happening at a tournament. Yeah, tournament play isn't conducted in best of one, with only some play-in events being best of one in the Arena Open, but even then, all the Arena Open events are draft or sealed anyway, and thus wouldn't have the land-based exploit come up regardless unless somebody had, like, the perfect pool to do it with. Either way, nothing with any kind of coverage would be best of one, so there's really no way this would ruin an actual event that is widely known. The only thing I can think is that maybe there could have been some kind of very early event that used best of one that apparently no one other than you still has any commentary online about, and they decided that best of one wasn't a good format for high level competitive Magic, something they already knew because of the fact that they don't conduct any tournaments outside of Arena in that format. That seems to be kind of an overarching problem, though. The vast majority of this applies either primarily or entirely to best of one Magic, because when looking at the best of 3 metagame between Arena and Paper Magic, it's nearly the same with a few things in different order, primarily based on how long the decks have been out and how much faster results come out with Arena compared to in Paper, because they don't have to wait for tournaments to happen to display a shift in the competitive landscape, whereas the best of one format is more heavily weighted towards aggro decks. Which makes sense because aggro decks tend to be more likely to win most Game 1 matches in a tournament setting.
Just think about this and everything I say in this video before you hand over money to enter a digital tournament on Arena. So let's talk about the gem exploit. I made a whole video on this, so just gonna reference it, but somebody gave themselves like 1 million gems. Not by hacking a database, not by some credit card fraud or something. Nope, they did it because the purchase system took the client's word for it. Let me tell you about competitive ranked games that you throw money into. The entire game that is running locally should be a bunch of graphics, sounds, and animations, and that just function as like a monitor, okay? It doesn't think, it just shows what the server tells it to. All the calculations, all the die rolls, all the randomization, all the purchase calculations, everything should be on the server. You don't trust anything coming out of the client. It is basically read-only one direction. To the extent that it can be. You still have to click and tell it, I'm tapping this for mana, for example, but everything else, to the highest extent you can get, needs to be zero trust on the server side. And that goes triple when it comes to the financial gem purchase system.
Hey, fun fact, you have no idea what you're talking about. What else is new? But then again, this is supposed to be something you have expertise in. The engine is going to run on the client, and in reality, the way you stop cheating is by using a server authoritative netcode. In other words, you're executing the action on both sides, but what the server says the result should be overrides what the client says that the result should be. Now, considering what we're talking about, one could see how you're saying the same thing. In the case of a shuffler or financial transactions, it should be the server-side game instance just doing all the work and then sending the client-side game instance the end result. And you'd be absolutely right in the case of the shuffler. However, this is one I actually found and can verify how it was done, and that's not how it fucking works.
So naturally, what did they do? Local math. So somebody just modified it to send slightly different code, and guess what? The server took it.
You know, if you actually read the blog post where he describes how he did this, you would know that it wasn't simple, even if the fact that there was a client-side price calculation was weird, because he couldn't just modify the price, but instead had to trick the client into ordering over 21 million packs because the code apparently didn't check for overflow. So you'd still be able to send the order and trick the server into thinking it was correct by overflowing the number of packs ordered. It's basically the same kind of glitch that made Missing No happen in Pokemon. And that's not even to say that it's something that wasn't sloppy, just that it actually does require someone to trick both the server and the client.
Speaking of that, I believe he did it by decompiling the code because it's written in Unity, and so it doesn't have any like decompiling protections. I forget what you call that, obfuscation or something. There's a term for it. Even the .NET framework crap uses it, and that's like building programs with, you know, Legos, basically.
This article from the same guy that is literally linked in the original article about this exploit explicitly describes using a .NET decompiler to decompile Unity code because of the fact that they use the same thing. Oh, and by the way, obfuscation would make patching either impossible or require the entirety of the software to be replaced with every single fucking patch, rather than having individual .dll files replaced as needed, thus meaning that patch day would be hell for the consumer if software was obfuscated. Seriously, how is the guy that's supposed to have a software engineering degree understanding what's going on here less than the loser that talks about pop music and Survivor?
I have a degree in VB.NET. Anyway, look, I ain't writing that crap in C#, okay? Piss off.
Which is only different from C# by way of syntax, so you should still understand the functionality of C#, even if you need a translation of the exact code, thus making this potential counter-argument completely irrelevant to what I'm saying. And by the way, fun fact, I was originally going to go to college for computer programming. I never found a single program that taught me one coding language and not like 4 or 5 different ones. So I have my doubts about your degree if you're saying you only know one language. Unless the other languages you know are obsolete because you haven't kept up with your education. Which you really should do if you're in software engineering. Any tech field, really.
So fully decompiled it, and I think somebody else had done that earlier is my suspicion because they somehow found out, or one of the devs just outright said this is what we're using for the shuffle thing, and it's known to have enough of a shift that it's not the right way to randomize your shuffling.
Apparently, you didn't read the Reddit post you told people to go look for earlier, because they specifically said that Wizard stated what the components of the shuffler were, and one of them had what looked like an implementation error that this shuffler was known to have. He also said that he used a third-party tool, something you talked about earlier in the video. So you know so little of what you're talking about, you're forgetting what you said less than 10 minutes ago. Good job. Top-notch fucking gameplay right here, boys.
How do they know? Because people yelled at him for using the same algorithm in Magic the Gathering Online.
Yeah, not to harp too much on the cases where I can find no proof of the claim that you're making, but yeah, I can find no proof of the claim that you're making of what the MTGO shuffler is. I can find nothing about someone finding out that it and Arena use the same shuffler, and in fact, the only comments I can find are people blaming the software because of Mana Screw and Mana Flood ever existing in their games on MTGO, and others wondering why Arena's shuffler has issues when MTGO has a perfectly fine shuffler. So, you know, This bitchware thing with you is a pattern, isn't it?
All right, so we're still in the proven section. This is all stuff that was proven, and this was proven by me personally. So they've never admitted it, but it was proven. So I ran the same deck 500 times and tracked my go first rate on a spreadsheet. Standard constructed league got, I think, roughly a 60-40 split. So I was going first 40% of the time. That is still, if it was 51%, I'd say, yeah, variance. In a sample size of 500 games, if you get a 60-40 split, there is something wrong there. There is a coding problem where they're doing it on purpose. So I ran an even faster deck because I think the speed of the deck, the CMC, like if you were going to say, I'm going to rig who goes first, what would you base it on? And so I came up with a theory based on that and said, let's run the fastest blitz deck I have. You know darn well which one I'm talking about. And I went first in 1,000 games that I tracked, 21% of the time. Then I built 5 brand new decks that weren't similar to anything else I was running, ran them, and went first 100% of the time, all 15 games.
Do I even need to continue with any of your video at this point? You are citing yourself and saying it's definitively proven. You are using a sample size of 15 as part of your evidence. You even say later the thing that's actually wrong with your sample size. Your experiment is incredibly unscientific. But let's delve into that a little bit more. You ran one deck 500 times. For one, as we'll talk about later, the fact that you didn't record the win-loss rate of this deck, both going first and going second, means that what hypothesis you get out of that 40% win rate is meaningless. It also is meaningless because you aren't selecting your opponents, so you have no idea how this proposed algorithm would be affecting them, meaning you'd need a much larger sample size than a typical experiment in order to even come close to isolating that variable, on top of needing to record what kind of deck you were facing in each instance, its colors, identifying its win condition, tons of shit that you didn't say that you recorded. This is part of the reason the test concerning the shuffler took 1 million games, and that was easier to test for than what you're talking about, considering the fact that it didn't need to factor in who the opponent was. It's also impossible to calculate a margin of error here, but most of the time it's going to be between 4 and 8%. So it's very possible that depending on what the exact number is, you could still fall outside of that 95% certainty range. Really, the best thing you can do is recreate the experiment and see what the results are over multiple rounds of doing the same test. But surely I can't have anything negative to say about second test, right? 21% over 1,000 games sure feels like a significant statistic that shows a lack of parity in the system that determines who goes first. Well, other than one important thing that affects the proven section of the video and is even worse here than what I was talking about before. If you have the proof, where is it? Where's the data you claim to have put into a spreadsheet? Not even showing the data on screen, linking to it in the description, and if it's in another video that you've done, then maybe linking that in the description would be good to show people that you're not talking out of your ass. I forgot I was covering Desolator magic for a second. Never mind about that last part, shit.
It's either based on the average CMC, the win rate, or the difference between the win rate going first and going second. And in that deck, if I go first, I've already won, and if I go second, I probably already won. So there's no denying it, and people are finally coming around, literally in 2023 on Reddit. It's becoming a thing. They're deleting posts. They're trying to cover for WotC. They're trying to call people paranoid and gaslight us and all this other crap because they don't want to admit that Arena's trash. People are still saying, hey, out of 16 games, I went first one time. What is going on? And they just deleted the post.
For reasons that you are literally about to explain.
Now, that could just happen. That's a very unscientific sample size, but people are saying, yeah, but just tracking in my head. Well, don't track it in your head. Humans have terrible perception. There's all kinds of biases where, like, you mentally weigh going first more than going second, and you're going to notice one more because it's negative, and, you got to do it on, like, a real number tracking, and that's what I did, and there you go.
Even though your sample size is also unscientific, 500 games and 1,000 games is actually a fairly small number of instances to be gathering data on top of being an inconsistent number of games to track with, which really points to the possibility of just cherry-picking data and saying that you're not.
Even funnier, a couple months back, they turned it off for a couple weeks. I ran 50 games, I went first 24 times. So I jumped on live stream and I'm like, hey, let's just absolutely crush people with my Candy Cane deck because now I'm allowed to go first an actual fair number of times. I mean, I guess I have a different definition of fair as WotC does. Fair is in reality, math, in the universe, and at parity with paper.
And your declaration that this system was turned off is based on an even more unscientific method. Good fucking job, bro.
But we don't play best of one in paper, which was their excuse for rigging everything in best of one.
Okay, so for one, it was just the hand smoother, which you admitted was something that you liked. Nothing else that you've talked about has been expressed by the devs to be different between best of 3 and best of 1. And the only other thing to my knowledge that is different is the fact that number 1, you can sideboard, number 2, you actually get to pick if you go first or second. Second of all, if your issue with the game being rigged is something you think is correlated to best of 3 gameplay, then why don't you play best of 3? I mean, the switch for best of 3 is right there on the Find Match screen. It wouldn't change if these issues exist, but you seem to be talking as though best of 1 is the only thing Arena has, as indicated by the fact that you think pro-level tournaments are actually using it. For that matter, aren't you supposed to be like a guy who beats net deckers? Okay, beat them on the place where they can make their decks easier, dumbass.
And sad to report, my short research and evidence have showed that they have turned it back on. At least they're willing to experiment with it, but none of this has ever been admitted by the devs.
So what you're saying is, you had a string of 50-50 luck, and then you did a little bit of looking, and when you didn't get 50-50 results over a sample size that you, didn't fucking tell us, you decided they must have turned it back on. Like, it's no wonder these things aren't being taken down if they exist. The evidence of it is so paltry, and spoiler alert, going first in Magic isn't really that big of a deal because of summoning sickness. So even if it were rigged, it would only matter if you're making a deck that predicates its entire strategy on going first to begin with. In other words, a shitty deck.
It's the same thing as the hand smoother. Don't make us say, we did a short study, we did a thing, we tracked it, we suspect this, that, the other thing, that we all think this is going on, and then they finally come out and go, oh yeah, this was going on in the background the whole time. Didn't you know that? Oh, yeah. Most of us don't care that the system exists. We just want to know when something other than exact random chance is happening. Okay? Then we can give you feedback of what we think about it, and you can do with that what you want, but we want to know that it is going on, because there's no point in me building a fast deck if you're just gonna cheat me and not let me go first 50% of the time with it.
Wait, didn't you just say you wanted it to be in parity with Paper Magic? So you do care if it's different from random chance then. Now, to be fair, with the last part of that, it seems like he's saying that he'd rather know it's different and be upset about that than be told after discovering it for himself. Yeah, so the thing is, the hand smoother was something they did tell people about from the beginning, and the shuffler issue was a bug? The pack odds being based on a pity system was something said at the beginning, and not even something people were talking about being weird about packs before it was outright stated to be the way that it worked. A lot of stuff is talked about in patch notes and articles about the state of the game, with the reason that some people don't already know this just being that, well, they don't read that stuff and just assume that it's Paper Magic, even though they already have a client that's more in parity with Paper Magic and that's running alongside Arena.
If you don't like that I'm achieving a 75 to 80% win ratio with that deck, you have something to do about it. It's called the card ban button, which based on the last couple years, you have clearly lost. You have misplaced that button. Build another one.
The deck he's talking about getting a 75 to 80% win rate with is one that he admits that he's primarily playing in gold, as seen in this clip.
It is shocking how many people fall for this. I mean, we're in the gold league. Okay, it's like the little leagues.
You're right, Des. It is the little leagues. Weirdness of you hiding usernames and ranks aside, you do go into platinum at the end of that video with a deck you've supposedly been playing for 3 years while highlighting your disdain for the top of the meta, saying it's the same couple of decks over and over again, and yet when you play lower ranked pools, you're calling out how broken your deck is. Even though clearly what you're doing isn't the problem, especially since the ban list would primarily factor in match play, so anything you're losing to is just easier for everyone to use against you, and especially if going first is so important to your win rate if you feel it's an unfair advantage to go first less than 50% of the time. And really all it takes is more removal and you suddenly can't keep a creature on your board to save your life, especially when we look at the actual games from that video. We have the first game where your opponent was stuck on 2 lands while you were on 4 and yet somehow didn't realize that Mana Screw might be part of the equation, and somehow think it's a gotcha that he single blocked when you still didn't kill him.
Yeah, People think that with full mana open and a card with Connive on it, that I might not have something up my sleeve, I guess. They think maybe I just swung into a 2/2 with a double striker because I'm trying to trade, which, no, that's stupid and you're wrong. I hate to under this, but... Oh, yeah, that would have been really a lot closer to lethal, but I also just need my creature to exist. So, alright.
Nothing you have in your hand protects your creature, and you actually don't need both pump spells in your hand to get lethal after the fact, so you could have easily discarded the Aggravate. Although I still agree with the move, since it really wasn't worth the extra counters, and I would imagine if you're not going for the kill, saving that second Aggravate for a defensive play in the event of removal where toughness matters would have been the safer play, especially since you could then connive on the opponent's turn as well, and if they can't get rid of it, you have lethal no matter what. But hey, while I'm here, let's talk about the second game in that video, the opening few turns of which were sped up and partially covered by an overlay, which is actually pretty relevant to what I have to say about it.
I think he's gonna let it through. Yeah, why are people this stupid? I'd love to know. This is amazing. This is amazing. If he can't kill this, he's dead next turn because I got trampled. There's nothing he can do if he cannot remove this one card. And remember, I gave him an extra turn. He would have been dead one turn earlier.
So the implication of him giving an extra turn to his opponent comes from the fact that he played Twin Blade Geist on turn 3 rather than on turn 2, thus meaning that the swing he's doing right now would have been possible on turn 3. Which really isn't technically true. He wouldn't have had the mana for both pump spells, but that doesn't change the kill turn that he's implying. What does change that kill turn is the fact that Twin Blade Geist on turn 2 wouldn't have happened with that hand, since its only white source by turn 2 was the Sundown Pass that he played tapped. Of course, the counter argument is that he gave him an extra turn by not mulliganing to have his opening hand contain both red and white, but that's a bit too generous of an interpretation. Interesting that you make a claim like this after fast forwarding through partially covered up board states. Oh, there's more from this particular game too that I want to talk about.
He's playing my favorite color combo, so I don't feel that bad. Plus Fairy Tribal, they're just flying Merfolk, let's be honest.
Okay, so for one, a single fairy in the deck does not a Kindred deck make, especially since there aren't any fairies in white that aren't changelings, and Fairy Vandal cares about card draw, so it's probably more likely to be some kind of weenie control shell based on the wedding announcement and Mishra's Foundry, which is gonna be relevant in a moment. Second of all, fucking no. Just because both fairies and merfolk are blue doesn't make them the same thing. Merfolk is actually way more aggressive of a strategy, tends to use green as a secondary color, and doesn't have flash, while most fairies have flash specifically because of their disruptive effects, which isn't something that merfolk typically do, aside from the occasional curse catcher or the like.
He's got something. He's definitely got something. He just hovered, like nicked my card as I call it. He just hovered over it, so he's like checking it to see if he can target it or something. Or he's trying to set up some elaborate thing with X and failing to target it correctly, or, you know, something like that. Let's see what he does. This is going to be a long game. I mean, if it's 20-4, I'm going to keep playing, you know what I mean? It's over, and I just top decked a creature just in case. So if he has some kind of, I don't know, what, Aether Spouts ain't legal? I don't know.
Keep this in mind too, he spent a lot of time thinking. He even hovered over your card for a moment and literally went draw go on you while being blue, black, and white. You should be playing around removal here, and yet here you are presuming that the game is over.
Oh, if he was really smart, he would triple block, but he doesn't know that I have this, and nobody runs this. That's the thing. If I was at a tournament and they were information sharing, I would not win. I would not even cross 50% win rate, I guarantee it. Because they would just, like, keep accordingly. Keep a different opening hand accordingly.
If this was a tournament, they would just sideboard against you in game 2. Funny how you seem to no longer thrive when people know what you're doing. Almost like you're not actually that good at the game and can only rely on the element of surprise to win games, so don't like decks that are powerful enough to be prepared for a wider variety of situations. But, you know, maybe that's just my interpretation.
So he doesn't know that I'm Boost Trample Ultra Blitz. if he did, he probably would not have blocked with just that one, just saying. So he's trying to stack it up and be like, well, he can't swing a 1/1 into 2/2/2, so I'll just stall. No, you won't. Oh, what are we doing? Great. Destroy target creature with mana value 3 or less. So I can't even boost up like the attack power or nothing. So if I didn't have a creature right now, I'd boost it. But we'll just cast this one.
Yeah, from the play the opponent made, I can tell you the real reason they made the block that they did. So they knew you were a pump deck after your first attack, because of course they did. They blocked with only Fairy Vandal because you would have been required to pump your creature in order to avoid a trade, and then responded to the pump with the removal spell, thus using one card to get rid of both your creature and one of the pump spells in your hand, especially since that pump spell was one of your sources of trample, which lets you deal damage even though you were blocked. Now, in reality, they could have played this a little bit better. Wait for you to pass priority with the stack empty and then remove your creature. It's possible that they were worried about you having some sort of removal yourself, or they just didn't know that they could do that. But they had an opportunity to make you waste at least one more card out of your hand here. And the funny thing is, your whole thing about how 3-year rotation gave you this incredibly broken deck that people can't answer, the answer they used on you, which you admit was one that you couldn't use a pump spell to protect from, was one that would have rotated if not for 3-year rotation. But you know what? While we're here, let's talk about the third game too. And the fourth game.
Alright, so that last game I lost just literally because I misclicked. Not misplayed, misclicked, because I haven't adjusted my mouse's pulling rate and I was trying to play way too fast. It's a new computer, same mouse, and it's just not there. The acceleration is a little different.
You know, this is basically the my controller's broken, my dad works at Microsoft vibe. But I'm not even going to claim that he's lying here. Mostly because of the fact that he doesn't show the gameplay, so I don't have the opportunity to see for myself what the play is that was the result of a misclick. But it's very interesting that when you factor in the game you lost, when you say that it was no fault of your own, it matches up perfectly with that 75 to 80% win rate that you were talking so much about. Weird.
But whatever this is, it looks like a toxic deck. I doubt he has too much removal. Usually if you're running removal, it's blue-black.
Even though white has a ton of removal, especially for after your creatures have been pumped in the form of Destroy Evil and the admittedly less likely to affect you Valorous Stance. Like, even looking at the deck list considered typical for the tier 1 of the metagame, mono white aggro has Ossification and a Ganjo, which is in your fucking deck. Azorius Soldiers has Werefox Bodyguard, another mono-white removal spell. It gives you what was removed back when it leaves the battlefield. And even Boros Aggro has Get Lost and a Ganjo, once again, that card that's in your deck that's mono-white removal. Not to mention how much removal that only requires white that Selesnya Enchantments has. And black is one of the colors in blue-black, and your own deck has a toxic creature that it doesn't have evasion, so can benefit from removal to clear the board before it swings in, especially since it does more poison than the majority of toxic creatures. So assuming a white-black deck doesn't have a removal is stupid, especially since...
So high deck variety here in gold. Oh, of course, -1. The one removal spell in this damn deck.
There's a removal spell with Proliferate, a thing that a toxic deck really fucking wants, that gets played on you immediately. Since we're talking about pretty much any removal spell that would fit into a toxic deck, there's Drown and Ichor, which only an Aggravate onto a Virtuoso can effectively get you past without some other setup. So no, it's not the only removal in their deck, or at the very least, it's silly to assume so. But generally speaking, this kind of shows how bad your mindset is. You rely on other people's misplays to win, and then call it the strength of your deck. You don't understand how to read incredibly obvious tells, and you make so many wild assumptions about what someone's deck can do based on nothing. It's no wonder that you don't like people playing top tier decks. It requires actually knowing the deck to counteract it, and actually knowing what's going on in this game is something that is beyond you, including in relation to how powerful your own deck actually is. I know this because I played the deck with the exact list given in the description, which you said to not change. Funny how you're okay with net decking if people are stealing from you. Anyway, 62 cards, by the way, and I'll get into the results of me doing that later, but the bottom line is this. If it's winning in lower pools, but isn't seen in higher pools, then maybe they won't ban it because it's not actually a problem. Especially since the win rate I got ain't even anywhere close to what you said. Yep, you're seeing that right on the screen, by the way. That's a 59% over the course of 100 games. If you're wondering how I recorded these results, by the way, it was a third-party tracker. One that gave me more information than just what I'm showing on screen, although admittedly the card usage data only reflects like 98 games instead of 100 because 2 games instantly drew because of some kind of glitch. It's still funny how you claim that Wizards doesn't allow third-party trackers anymore. Especially when they have a tick box in the account settings within Arena specifically for third-party plugin support. Now, admittedly, I only recorded results of 100 games, with some of the games being in Silver and Platinum because I was playing Commander more so than anything on Arena for the past couple of years, really. But not only is the win rate generally better in Platinum than in Gold, it really shouldn't matter, because you're supposed to be running a deck that should be banned, right? Your video was uploaded about 2 days after the release of Lost Caverns of Ixalan, and I didn't identify any cards from that set being used by your opponents, so another excuse you might have is that the release of Lost Caverns of Ixalan resulted in a drop in your power level. Well, for one, you're still saying that on the 24th, so what the fuck does that tell you? And for two, your call for a ban is because you think the deck should be stopped, right? Okay, so if new cards being released results in your deck not being as good, then they're stopping what you're doing by adding cards to counteract it rather than by banning cards. They have means of shifting the meta other than a ban button. Maybe you can claim these other ways Arena cheats you that you cite. Okay, cool. How did you collect your data on the win rate to be able to call it 75 to 80%? You said it yourself, just counting up in your head is a totally unscientific way to do it because you'll emotionally weigh some results more than others, and recording those wins on paper doesn't translate well when paper doesn't officially use a best of one format. Maybe you can claim to pilot the deck better than me. Okay, in that case, your data is unreplicable and therefore not trustworthy. Anyway, back on topic. You know, for someone who claims to hate the metagame, you sure do not seem to understand what it is or how it works either, since even Best of One has a 5-deck top tier and a 4-deck tier 2, meaning no, it's not the same 2 or 3 decks over and over again. Sorry, right, we kind of got on a sidetrack there. Back to a sidetrack within a sidetrack, no less. Back to your original video. Let's talk about the ban button being broken. Let's talk about how that would be proven wrong in a week. Let's talk about how the ban button has apparently been missing for years, but got used in Standard in May of the same year you claim this, in Legacy during March of the same year you claim this, and hit Modern just a year before this claim in October, along with, by the way, also hitting Standard at that time. Gee, it's almost like you're full of shit!
This next one's really simple. There was at least 2 exploits, there'll be 3, and they aren't in the game anymore, so I can kind of tell you how they work. One was spamming a certain pet animation would crash the other person's computer, you would just win. And then there was another thing where they could prevent you from taking an action by rapidly hovering over the cards, and then the white border thing would like get caught in some kind of subroutine that would eat up all your RAM or something, I don't know. None of those really affected me. I saw people try the color shift thing, and then the hover thing against me. It didn't work because I'm running an i7 with 32 gigs of RAM. So, you know, good luck, but you want to disconnect somebody with crap internet on a crap computer because you could run Arena on a potato. They're already on the edge. Yeah, people are getting free wins doing that. And we caught so many people doing that in the wild. I think it's safe to call it proven at this point. Well, plus, WotC came out and said, this is a problem anybody caught doing it has been banned and we patched it. So there's also that evidence, you know, if you want to weigh that.
I like how you're toning this as the developers being assholes, while at the same time pointing out how they punished people for exploiting this and fixed it so it couldn't be further exploited. It's not even that you're pointing this out as a historical issue that Arena has had, but rather the fact that your insistence on calling it cheating makes it inflammatory simply because of how contrarian you want to sound to get clicks, to the point where you're doing it in a manipulative way rather than as a marketing tactic.
The go first system pisses me off more than anything else in the game except for two things you're going to hear about later in this video.
Wait, so you change topic, then come back to the thing you were just talking about just to say, be angry, just give mana? My god, not only is this the informational equivalent of Alex Jones riding a unicycle, it's also paced that way too.
So next up, real simple one. They said, they absolutely promised that they will give out at least X amount of Mastery Pass experience for free. I believe they said 3,000 or 5,000, I want to say 5,000, and then they proceeded to just not do that. So you're supposed to get at least, I want to say 5,000 XP, various different ways for going into free events and all that. And then they didn't do it, then they didn't do it, then they didn't do it for multiple Mastery Passes in a row. I haven't paid attention lately. People called them out on it. I made a video on it. I don't know.
Did they promise it one time or with every Mastery Pass? You even mentioned it was through events, so you're sure it's not just the amount that you get from playing? I can't find where this promise was made, so I'm just left to assume. As for the scenario where it was a one-time disbursement of XP, then, they did it in 2019. Whoop!
They made a legally binding promise like to their customers saying we are going to do this public statement on their website, and then as far as I know never took it back, never said, oh, now we're not doing it. Well, it sounds like a lawsuit to me.
Certainly not the first time you'd say that someone deserves legal action against them and pussied out when it came to backing up your shit. Am I petty? I feel like I'm a little bit petty. Now, truth be told, I don't even feel like finishing all this because it's just more of this. Hell, your whole fucking brand is basically this, and you're not even the main course in this one, and for that matter you're barely a side dish. So let me just get straight to the final thoughts on this little hors d'oeuvre. You are the low tier god of Magic the Gathering. You spend entirely too much goddamn energy on bitching about everything being broken and netdecker this and pro player that, to the point where I honestly feel like you either hate this game or are doing it intentionally in order to garner views. The problem being that it stopped working a long time ago. You like to say you're not one for doing research, but if you're going to call a video on your channel a documentary, I don't know, maybe you should be. There's so many things you talk about so confidently that I can half the time disprove with a Google search, and the other half just using my own experience in the game. Seriously, even if we look at your gameplay, the funny thing is that y'all complain about the top tier decks, only to wind up running one of them yourself when you start playing Arena. If you don't win, the game's rigged. If you win, Wizards should ban your shit. But God forbid should you enter a tournament where you have to play against people who are actually able to answer your bullshit. Then they're filthy net deckers. You're the same contrarian that you've always been, and it's not working for you, which leads to my advice. Your entire fucking genre of being blindly inflammatory with no regards for the actual facts of a situation is fucking dead. And based on how stagnant at best your numbers are, I'm pretty sure you know that. The reason being is that the concept is not built for longevity, and people got sick of it when so many of the people perpetuating the genre went the way of the fucking dodo back when, I don't know, when was it that I covered quartering? It's not even that providing criticism is dead. Nah, people do that all the time. Look at the series you're watching this in. But if the popularity of the video essay genre is any indication, it proves that what the YouTube audience wants is exactly what I keep saying people should make more of. Quality pieces with interesting topics of research that, even if they take longer to produce, are worth the fucking wait. Maybe even with live streams or more simplified content thrown in between. You clearly have some audience still, don't get me wrong. Seems like once someone gets an audience, it takes quite a bit for that audience to completely go away. And even then, there are some diehards, both of the parasocial variety and otherwise. But, well, I spoke of playing the controversy game the last time I mentioned you and how I can play it better. You want to know why? It's because I don't just blindly contradict the popular narrative for no reason. I've had some people call me a corporate shill, or should I say corporate cocksucker, simply because, well, I will sometimes support a pro-corporate position, but at the same time, when something really is egregious, I tend to call it out no matter which side it comes from. And I'm sure that's what you want your audience to think that you are. But the difference between you and me, I create conversations. You don't want to have one. And if you want to see how that goes, I dare you to actually go through with your shitty little false flag threats again and see how quick I drag your ass back to the Stone Age. Okay, so, was that good enough, Ephraim? I have now been mean to Desolator Magic in an actual commentary. Can we get back to how dumb you are? Because we've got a lot more to go through. Thanks.